Everyone, we'll get started here in just a minute. If you want to go ahead and drop any questions that you have in chat, you're more than welcome to. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. If this is your first time here, welcome to Bulb Digital Office Hours. This is something that we do once a month, the first Wednesday of every month. And it was kind of a short break between the last one that we did and this one. So we might be a little light on attendees, but we delayed the last one because of spring break and all that good stuff. So the gist of Office Hours is we are here to answer any questions that you have about Office 365 or anything that your workplace is working through that you might need some help on. We'd love to just chat with you and talk through anything that you need help with. So if you're on YouTube, you're welcome to drop questions in the chat. We also have Teams meeting, so those of you on the Teams meeting can raise your hand if you want to unmute and talk to us. So outside of that, just want to, again, thanks for being here. We're going to turn it over to Matt and Mike here in a second, but we don't have any questions quite yet in chat. So again, if you have any, feel free to drop those in chat. I think we do have a scenario that we wanted to ask about, though. I'm going to turn it over to Emma.
Hey everyone. Emma behind the production desk. But I've got a question that Matt, you and I were sort of spitballing on this morning. Interested to get Mike's thoughts on it as well. When it comes to the challenge of scheduling meetings, specifically with external partners, and when you're talking about multiple people on both sides, internally and externally, what do you think are the best practices, and what have you kind of come up against when trying to solve that problem?
just today, and as part of that, it's been something that's been weighing on my mind for a while. We'll give you a little bit of history, a little bit, and I'll explain a little bit of our philosophy around it, and then I think we'll dive into some more detail. So, like, traditionally scheduling meetings, especially with external parties, right? So internally, like in your organization, it's like, oh, add people into the calendar, look at the calendar, see who's available, choose a time, send a meeting invite, right? But when you're external partners, you don't have access to their calendar. So how do you solve that? And traditionally, call the person, send emails back and forth. I send my options, you send me your options, and somebody chooses one. Honestly, in some cases, it can be almost a full-time job to just try to wrangle people's schedules and get meetings to be created. We have moved away from that by using technology. So there are a bunch of different tools that can be used to figure this stuff out. Everything from surveys. So this would be like Microsoft has the meeting time polling feature. You've got the Find Time app from Microsoft. You've got MS Bookings. You've got Calendly. You've got I think there's a calendar boss or something. Like there's a bunch of apps out there that will try to help you with this problem. And specifically, the conversation that Em and I were having is this customer and this engagement. We had some challenges with them. We would send our processes. Generally speaking, we send a Calendly link and we say, hey, click this link, find a time that works for you and your team, and it'll automatically schedule. And you can be assured that it'll be good on our calendar because we have the Calendly link to our calendars, and so then you can see what our availability is. And there's several things that happen. Number one, this customer, they just wouldn't do it because it was either too much work or it didn't kind of function at all. It got to the point where they said, nope, here's my Microsoft Bookings link. You use that to schedule, but that only worked if we were scheduling with him, the one person. And so it just became a challenge, right? In addition, you and I both were at some training recently, and as part of that training, one of the people that we're discussing was like, I do not send out those ever, right? And when push came to shove, they were kind of like, the presenter was kind of like, well, I don't send it out to new customers, and we send it out to new customers all the time. But I think the gist of it is to reflect over the course of, I don't know, we've been using these technologies to do that scheduling for 2 years, year and a half, 2 years, something like that. What's right, what's wrong, what should be changed, what's that perspective on it? I still think you need to use tools, but like, what's the thoughts? Do you have any thoughts about it? I know I have some further thoughts. I expressed them to Emma, but
I think the tools that we're using are most effective for new engagements, new customers, new contacts, right? That's that type of stuff where you don't really have a good feel for who they are, what their schedule is, and you don't really have a relationship with them yet, and so it makes a lot of sense to be like, hey, if you're interested in talking to me, grab some time on my calendar, right?
What's your thought about the presenter and our other thing? Because he was basically like, that is so impersonal, and it is not. Which of course, I think he's a little bit more old school in that regard. What's your thoughts about that? Because that specifically, he was like, until I know someone, I would never ask them to do. Because you're putting the onus on them. You're saying, you customer, you find time on my calendar.
Yeah. So I think there's two things. One is whatever you choose to do doesn't have to be an absolute, right? So if you are in a situation where there's somebody that you feel like they're old school and they would not like that way of doing it, you're free to do something different, and that's okay. Obviously, I think the other thing that we've come to understand or we have learned to like about the way that we do it is that if we send a link to somebody and they are willing to take action, in other words, click the link and find a time that works for them and works for us, then it's a good chance that we're going to have a good conversation with them because they went through a little bit of effort to talk.
Yeah,
to
in
us,
our
right?
case, saying, you put in a little bit of effort to show that you're really interested and you're not just trying to get a free, because, quite frankly, we get people who just want to use us for a half an hour free consulting,
Right.
Which that's what this is for. Like if you have that need, we are cool with it. Do it in this format or one of our other formats that we're completely comfortable providing
Right.
that for free.
Right.
But if you're calling us to schedule something,
And the thing I'll add to that is, like, we haven't done this because the outsiders were being so evil to us.
no, yeah,
Right. The
for
reason
sure.
that we did this is because for years, because we're problem solvers and we're people pleasers, right? When somebody asks us something, our tendency is to say yes and hang on for an extra 5 or 10 minutes
Yeah.
to get to the end, to create
Yeah.
a great outcome. And we had to put some parameters and boundaries around that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like,
Well, it also is not very effective. You end up answering the same question multiple times when when the content is out there already and people could find it and use it.
right.
So
Yeah, so I think, like, I look at something like Calendly, which is what we use, as pretty effective for that front door, right? Getting people in the
So-
front door. Once you're engaged, like, I think there's a couple different scenarios, because once you're engaged and you have some sort of project rhythm, you're going to establish stand-ups or status check-ins or, whatever that is, maybe monthly, maybe weekly. And so when you're doing that, you're not like, hey, pick a random time that I'm available. You're going to set a specific schedule, right? You're
Cadence,
going to create
yeah.
a cadence for it. And so in that scenario, you're communicating directly with whoever it is that you're meeting with, asking them what their schedule is, what works for them. This is what works for us, and you line something up. I think the other scenario that I don't know how to deal with that well yet is like the in-between one, which is, let's say you're starting a new project. You've gotten past the Calendly link, right? And so they schedule time with you. You have an engagement now. You're going to actually do something with them. And you need to schedule some initial meetings where not only are there multiple people from your side who need to be, like, coordinated on their schedules, but you need that many more people on their side as well. And the Calendly link is only going to serve one side of that, right? And so then it's like, well, what do we do to figure out how to get everybody's schedules aligned? And I think there's a bit of a gap there. I don't know of a great tool that solves.
So in this case, the other thing that we had was, like, we are choosing oftentimes not to spend the time on our stand-ups, trying to schedule the next meeting and spend the time on other activities related to the project. So that was one of the things. But then the other one is we are working with them, but the people that we need engaged are not people who are in the project team. And so then they're not on the call, that stand-up call, to try to figure out that schedule, right? And so we end up sending that Calendly link out. And then in this particular case, it didn't work very well, right? Like, we ended up having to have special calls to just figure out the meetings.
Here's another challenge I'd like to throw you guys' way, because I think it's a newer thing that I've noticed Microsoft doing. I've been getting emails letting me know when Microsoft thinks my time should be to actually do heads down work. And I'm wondering if more people are actually scheduling out heads down time and what that's going to do to meeting availability, and trying to understand if a block is actually a block or if it's just blocked out to do work, right? Especially when we're talking about these meetings, when you've got 20 people's calendars you're trying to schedule in, it's important to kind of know some of that and have that transparency. Do you see Microsoft fixing that anytime soon?
I don't. It's not necessarily a Microsoft problem so much.
Right.
Microsoft does have way more options now to select different types of availability, working remote, or I don't know that they have one for blackout in particular, but it's very difficult to go. I've blocked this out, but it's okay because what you really want is you really want to say, this is blocked out, but for either these people or for this purpose, it's okay to overlap it, right? And that's almost impossible to really manage. It's the complexity and the human nature of a calendar and of what you really are doing, because having a blackout on Monday afternoon is fine, but if you have somebody that has a critical path need, it may be just fine for you to schedule something into that block. I would also say that it's something we're working on as well in regards to blocks and scheduling and all of that kind of stuff. Not having some availability that would work or that is an option is a sign of a problem, right? People who fill up their whole calendar to fill their whole calendar up aren't being effective with their calendars. There's something wrong. There's a trust issue that somebody isn't going to, like, I can't let somebody control my calendar, or I don't know, or they're just have too much. Like, it's okay. It's not okay, but it is what it is for a day, right?
I think it goes the other way too. My tendency is not to fill up my calendar. That's what it's always been. And then, so I plan in that not filled time that, like, I'm going to have time to get some stuff done, and then somebody fills it.
Right?
Yeah. And then it's like, well,
which is why you have to have a hybrid. Like, you really need to have, like, Monday afternoons I have some block time, but then, and maybe it's 2 days a week you have some block time, right? But the rest of the time, you kind of need to have some flexibility. You need to have that option, because the truth of the matter is, most people have to work with other people at some level sometimes, and you need to be able to find time for that. Like, you can't have everything planned out 2 months in advance. You can't have everything be the same every week. For most people, like, some people probably can, and it does depend on the type of work that you're doing and what you're doing. But yeah, I don't see Microsoft fixing it. Back to your question, Emma, what the feature she's talking about is Viva Insights. It will look at your calendar and identify, hey, it doesn't look like you have any heads down time. Here's a time that I think you could, a block of 2 hours or 4 hours that I think you should block off.
I just found it interesting that they're offering that, but that there isn't currently an Outlook option to differentiate between a meeting. Like you were saying, you can label things as working elsewhere or working remote, but you can't necessarily say. I think it would be helpful, right? I was just brainstorming if there was an option that was just heads down versus meetings, without having to actually share your entire calendar with someone.
Yeah. Yeah, like, they do have the categorize option, which can highlight things and allow you to kind of show things, but I think most of that is just for yourself. Like, it doesn't work for other people. I
think the real feature there, or something, and this wouldn't be exactly what it is, but it would be something to the effect of allow certain people to book over this time that I've booked for myself, and other people cannot. Right?
I mean,
like external people, right?
The way that's all handled is that you have to accept it. So it's always on you to accept or reject the invite. The bigger thing would be
for something like Calendly, for example, to show availability, right? In order to block out my time, I have to put a block in there, right?
You're specifically talking about the interaction with Calendly.
Yeah. So to allow external users to be able to say, oh, well, he's booked during that time, so I can't do that, but somebody else internally still could, right?
Yeah.
And so that's like a flavor or a category.
Which you can do that, but in order to do that, you have to configure Calendly and maintain it separately, which is the annoying part.
Yes.
If you just had an option to say things that are like this also don't.
Things that are like this, or if you,
Which, Calendly could help with that as well if they would provide you an option that says, because, when I do it, mine are all named blockout, right? Like,
yeah, if you had a category or something, you could.
Blockout are things that, you can't you can't schedule over in Calendly, or you can maybe, in our case, honestly, for our new client engagements, if somebody wants a new client discussion with us and it's in my blockout time, schedule it. Like, we'll interrupt it. It's important to us to get new business.
You know what? Maybe the other thing would be to, you could declare it the other way. And that is to say, these times on these days are open for Calendly invites.
Yes, but again, you have to be explicit about it to do that.
Right, but then I could be explicit about it in one platform as opposed to. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Not to belabor the point, but I saw an article on LinkedIn where someone was writing that on Fridays, at like 3 p.m. If people haven't scheduled a meeting, she goes in and blocks her entire calendar for the next week and then does so again the next Friday. So she'll know every single meeting she's going to have for that week, and then she just
People
goes ahead.
can't change it.
People can't change it,
Yeah.
right? Which is more of a philosophical question, but lobbing that, what do you guys think of that?
I mean, that's exactly the type of thing that I was talking about. Like that.
All that means is you can't get me unless you get me
A week ahead of time.
A week ahead of time, right?
Which.
It's okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe. It depends on the situation, right?
the
question-
you were correctly. You're 100% right, Emma. It's a philosophical question. Like a salesperson that can't meet with a new client for a week because they chose to block out, 4 half days.
Yeah.
I don't know, right?
Yeah, it depends on the role. If you're somebody who's engaged in and supposed to be having a lot of conversations with potential new clients,
or your role is
you
to
ought to
have
be
meetings
available.
with people.
Yeah, you
right?
ought to be available.
Salesperson is like probably the quintessential most, but I'm a HR person, for example, right? And one of my roles is to meet with new employees. Nobody can hire a new employee next week because I don't have any meeting spots. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Sounds hyper controlled.
It's an interesting thing. And maybe it works for them. Maybe they like you said. Maybe on the other end of it, on the other end of the spectrum, I am a heads down developer, right? Like that is my job. Well, at the beginning of the week, I probably know what my meeting should be like, and if somebody wants to schedule a meeting afterwards, I don't need to take it. It's not important. They can wait a week. It's not a big deal.
Awesome. Thanks for jumping in on that topic. So that came out, Matt, the scheduling came out of a retrospective we did on a project. Maybe we can chat, because I'm very Scrum focused right now, a little bit about the benefits of doing retros. I know I've worked on retros now with both of you, and just the best practices you could share with anyone listening on why a retro is actually so valuable, even though it can sometimes feel like tacked on to the end of a project.
So I'm gonna break it up into two things. One is the philosophical thing, which bleeds into the other one.
My favorite.
And that is if anyone on any topic, personal, professional, anything, is not reviewing and having some format, and hopefully a formal one, to assess how well something did and what they would do different, they should not expect the next time for something to be different. If you're working on a project at home, like building something new at the house, right? And you get done with that, and it was a terrible experience, and it didn't work very well, but you never spend any time talking or communicating or reflecting on how that went, I would imagine the next time you do it, it's probably going to happen very similar. Or all of the discussion about how it should work differently is going to happen when you start doing the next thing, which may cause other unintended problems, right? And the same thing happens at work. The same thing happens otherwise. The reason I'm talking about it this way is because Emma, you talked about it project-based. Maybe you don't do projects every day. Maybe you do something else, right? Like maybe for work, you're doing an activity all the time. Even in that case, if there isn't space in your organization to reflect on how that is working on a fairly regular basis, it's not gonna, it won't get better,
Yeah.
right?
I think for me, there's two things. One is, I don't want to call it forced, but structured, planned time to contemplate what happened. And if you don't do that, then it doesn't happen.
Or it doesn't happen well.
Yeah, which is what you're talking about. And then the other thing that I think I like the most is just a simple time where you slow down enough so that you can offer positive feedback and kudos to people who did great things over that last period of time in a public forum in front of everybody. because I think that that's something that doesn't happen enough, and it's a great opportunity to make stuff like that happen.
Yeah, the positive thing is an interesting thing too. A lot of people think about retrospectives or assessments of that nature as being all negative, and in fact, it's not. It's all of the above. Because if you don't reflect on what went well, again, how are you going to make sure you do it next time?
Yeah,
right?
we want to do more of that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other piece that I was going to talk about, like philosophical, everybody should be doing it at some level. But then the other one is related specifically to projects, which is more directly related to what Emma had to say. You know, the projects in by their own very nature are have a start and have an end, right? And they can have different durations. You 100% should be retrospecting on a regular basis. If you have a year-long project, you shouldn't wait to the end of the project to assess, right? In a development world, like a Scrum, like what Emma, if you're not familiar with it, Scrum is a very specific methodology around product management and development life cycles and like that kind of stuff. But like in a long development project, you should be setting a sprint cycle, you know, and maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe it's a week. And as part of that, every 2 weeks, you should be spending a short amount of time going, what went well, what didn't go well for that last sprint. And, you know, it doesn't have to be 2 weeks, right? From my perspective, like the retrospective thing doesn't have to be necessarily 2 weeks, but you definitely need to be doing it on a regular basis. Like you need to be making time for that because, again, how are you going to make it better? How are you going to improve if you're not allowing space for people to say, this is better, this is worse, like this is what we're going to do next? And to anybody who's like out there looking at it from a, you know, isn't that just a waste of time? We have so many people involved in this. That comes a lot from people who are not giving structure to it and managing it. So if you just say, we need to do retrospectives and say the philosophy is, yes, we need to retrospect stuff, and you just let people do whatever they want, it's going to be very uncontrolled, and it can get out of hand. Like it can spiral out of control, right? If you have a structure to it, if you make space for it that's purposeful, you can solve that problem. You can say, we spend, like let's say we're doing two-week sprints. We spend 15 minutes every 2 weeks, and we just talk about it. And, you know, 10 minutes of it is on this, or 5 minutes is on this, 5 minutes is on this, and 5 minutes is talking about like picking 2 things that we're going to do better next 2 weeks, right? Like the first 5 minutes is all just people being able to talk about what's positive, what's negative, and then the next 5 minutes, what's, you know, was problems, right? Or issues or areas you can improve. And then 5 minutes on, these are the specific actions. Like everybody's has a shared outcome for this, done. You can't find 15 minutes for your project team? Like, really? Like, you should be able to.
At another company I worked at, we called these look backs because we didn't know the word retrospective. But I had a situation where oftentimes there was always nuances to each project, and that was to blame for anything that went wrong. I had one particular coworker who just, it was just because the project had this kind of, you know, it was nuanced. And when it's not like this, then this wouldn't happen. So we don't really need a solution around that. What's your advice for that situation?
Maybe they're right. Like that's completely
stop doing those projects.
That's completely possible that it's nuanced every time, and that's the reason why. The bigger question is, does it matter? Sometimes things went bad, but it doesn't matter. Like, did you still accomplish your stuff? Yes. Was everybody?
And if we didn't, what could we do better?
Yeah. So I mean, if it was bad, like if something was a problem, and everybody agrees, we don't want that to happen again. Which I think that's probably the biggest problem that you might have been having is that person maybe doesn't agree that we don't want this to happen again. And if you have that problem, if you're like you can't all agree on that we want to make this better, I think it's a matter of trend, right? Like the other thing this allows you to do is document it, and okay, cool, we won't change it this week, but 2 weeks from now we have the same conversation again. Like it's a different customer, different project, same issue. It's apparently not like maybe it's true that it's a nuance for people that work like this, but maybe all of our customers work like this. Like our market, how we work with people that are like this. So we should do something about that, right? You build the case that makes it more difficult for people to ignore problems, right? The other thing is, I would ask, why not? Like, what was the reason that person didn't want to address it? Is it, we do hopes and fears stuff, right? I would ask them, like, what are you afraid of? Like,
Right.
what is the reason you don't? And if the answer is, it's going to take too long, it's going to cost too much, it's going to, like, I'm just making it up, but then you can actually talk about those things. And maybe they're right. Maybe, it's only going to improve this project by 2%, but it's going to cost 20% of the budget. Okay, we probably shouldn't do that, right? Like that something else is wrong, right?
Yeah.
But you it's very difficult to have a conversation with all you get is, I think this is a special case, right?
Right.
Being a special case, number one, once you build up a history of it happening over and over again, you can say, nope, it's not a special case. And then second, if they still are like, but still don't think we should do it, you can have a conversation about, like, what's driving that, what's the why behind that.
Yeah, that's great. We did have a question that just came in on our YouTube chat.
Yeah.
Tanya asks, can you use a Microsoft form to create a news page on SharePoint?
Microsoft Form in particular, all by itself, no. With Power Automate, I believe so. I'm going to look at something quick. I believe the way that you would have to do it is to use the REST API. Yep. So I think you can. I would need to do a little bit of thinking about, like, what the actual how that would really work. But if you've ever dealt with the REST API, you can do an MS form, and the MS form submits, and then the trigger for the Power Automate is based on the MS form submittal. Then you take the contents from the MS form submittal, and then you craft a HTTP request effectively, a special one for SharePoint, which the licensing for that is that you're allowed to do that, because normal, like, web services, you would usually have to have a secondary license because it's a premium connector. But there's a carve out basically for SharePoint because there's an actual action within the SharePoint connector that will make a request to an API that's on the SharePoint URL. So it's, yourtenant.sharepoint.com/_API web whatever you're going to do. And you'd need to figure out, like, there's a bunch of Microsoft documentation about what those web requests are, but you can use that web request to create a page and then set the properties on that page. And Mike, you have some familiarity with, like, configuring the web parts, right?
Yeah, so
On a news page, you could just do text, can't you? And it's just a property or something?
yeah, so I haven't done it with Power Automate yet, but I've done it with PowerShell, so using the PNP
Yep.
stuff. And so you'll create basically a news post. So there's a type of modern page that you'll create, and then that has other attributes that you can use, like when it was published if you want to, and its publishing state. So when you're all done creating the page, you'll want to set that publishing state to true, basically, or to, I think it might be 2 is the value that actually gets set to. And then there's other stuff that you can do. So when you create that page, you can add a section to that page, and you can choose the layout for that section, and then you can add a web part to that section if you want. And what I've typically done, which I think would align with your scenario, is just add a text web part to that section and then populate that text web part with HTML content. And so in your case, if it was just text, you could throw that in there. But again, all of the work that I've done with that was PNP PowerShell scripting. But conceptually, you could use the send HTTP request to SharePoint action in Power Automate to do all of those same things.
I'm looking, like, we can maybe do even an example quick. like depending on what you're trying to do. Let's see. Let's do an instant Cloudflow. Yeah, if you could share my screen, that would be good. So I'm going to add just some text. And then SharePoint REST, or HTTP, I think is what it is. Yep. So then the connection would be, I'm going to do it to onboarding. And I think this is a post. And then I'm going to go grab from here because I think what you really, there's a couple different ways you can do it. One would be this, which is the copy. Like this is get the file by URL and then copy it to, which would work, I think, in a lot of ways. I think this is the other way, which would be, you know, posting to the items. I think I'm going to do a copy. So I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say copy.
So the problem with the copy is you need to start with a blank page, right?
You don't have to have a blank.
A dummy one.
A page that's set up how you want. Like,
Yep.
for example, you could have all your regions. You could have your text. You could have.
Which would save you work in the Power Automate potentially.
Correct.
Yeah, if you are always creating the same thing. So she posted trying to use it as a substitute for a classic forum using page comments for dialogue. Wanted threaded discussions, not
team
Teams
chats. And you can't use Yammer. Like Yammer seems like the more appropriate technology, but you may not be able to use that. But I'm gonna quick continue on with this while she's maybe thinking about that. Let me go to the site contents of this.
So she said nope, she cannot use Yammer.
That is unfortunate because I think that's really what you really want. This is supposed to be the relative
So Tanya, being on
URL.
YouTube, you're not able to come off mute and talk to us. But I'm trying to envision the scenario you're creating. Is this one where somehow the MS form is embedded in a SharePoint page? And you're like, how are you doing a threaded discussion forum through an MS form?
She's saying basically you put an MS form at the top, embedded at the top of the page, and then you make a comment back or something. On the correct, you
So
can do a
just
comment.
Just add comments to it.
Yep.
We can't. Yeah. So the out of the box SharePoint comments don't do it either, do they? Comments on a news post.
No, because the problem is she wants that to be the topic. So each page would be the topic.
Right. So imagine you creating a Yammer post that is the equivalent of a new page.
Correct. But which will make it easier for the purpose of this. You could actually just create a template and just create a new one and use the name of the page to be the
Right.
Yeah, test, whatever. Let's see what we get. The flow ran successfully. Let's see what happened here. Let's do the date modified is what we got a few seconds ago. Right there, plain title 1. And there it is. The only problem is it's not published. So like what Mike said, you probably have to make another call to publish it. So another HTTP call, like you'd need to go get the page, the one that was just created, which I think probably comes back in the HTTP request. So let me edit it quick.
Did you send in the request? Did you put any body content? So
I just copied it.
Yeah. So the other thing. Oh, so it's just a copy.
Just a copy.
Yeah. So if you're creating it, there's a possibility that you can specify some of the metadata in the.
You
body
can
content,
you
right?
can 100%. Yeah. But let's do SharePoint update file metadata, update file properties. Let's do that. So let's choose.
Maybe.
I don't think you can do the published one this way, but you can probably do like the title. But let's see. So pages or Oh, it doesn't let you do
Pages libraries are special.
pages. Pages are special. Yeah, so you
So
probably have
gotta
to do
use the
HTTP. Yeah,
request. Yep.
you probably have to do HTTP request. Actually,
Be called site pages.
I wonder whether or not you can do. Update item, I wonder. Because I bet. No. Yeah. So you got to use the HTTP request. Could also use an app attached to the list to capture questions and turn them into a page. So like a Power App. Yeah, probably. Yeah. Or you could just use a Power App in general, probably, to capture some things and then spin off and create run a Power Automate behind the scenes. I think all of that would be possible. But I think you're dealing with this. Like, I don't know how familiar you are with Tanya with these HTTP requests, but you're going to be this is what you're going to be doing is creating a bunch of these. And there's a bunch of power here. Like, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff in here. The big thing is you got to figure out how to do it because it's not well documented. And you're going to be doing things like putting in JSON in the body and making sure your headers are all appropriate and choosing between, get and post and push and all of that good stuff.
Not exactly citizen developer friendly.
Yes. It's advanced developer friendly, right? It's it's allowed. It's not a premium connector. Yeah. So this is just a SharePoint connector. Like all this is. So like you saw here when I was doing it, you go SharePoint, and so this is the SharePoint connector, and you can see because there's no icon next to it. This is just an action in the SharePoint connector, right?
So we use these quite heavily in some of our other engagements where the data that we're dealing with is SharePoint list driven, and we have a need throughout the lifetime of a process to update the status or something, notes field or something on that particular list item in SharePoint. And rather than doing a update item in SharePoint, because that action can be somewhat heavy and cumbersome to deal with inside of the flow in the editor, we'll just do a send HTTP request, and we'll kind of have a pattern within our flow. And so every time I need to do it, I can copy paste that HTTP request and change out the JSON values, and we're good to go. And so it's little quick hits to send updates to SharePoint as opposed to that full update action, particularly if you have a lot of metadata on your list item.
You can also do crazy things like using this method if the user who is a member of the site collection admins group. You can even do things like overwrite the modified date, overwrite the last modified user, overwrite the created date, you can do all, like the HTTP connect or the HTTP action has lots of flexibility.
An example of like a real world example where this can be useful is if you ever find yourself in a scenario where you need to migrate news articles from one site to another site. And so if you were just to copy them and not think about it, you'll get updated publishing dates and authors on all of those articles that you copy over. So you'll be the author, for example, and they'll all get published when you create the new news post. And so you can use this method to backdate, set the original publishing date, as well as the original author, so that they basically appear as they were in their original state in your new site.
So you were talking about wanting to learn how to do this for updates. I'll just walk through it quick. It's not too complicated. Mike, can you just quick look up the headers that I need? Because I can't always remember. And usually I use an example that I just pull from what I want. But it's underscore API. So this is saying, hey, I want to do the API. Now, remember that this call is going to happen at whatever site address that you were on. And then basically from here, if you look at the example, you can see web lists get by title. So this is basically saying I want to get the API, or I want to hit the API. I want to look at a list within a web, and I want to get that list by name. So if I do API web lists, Yeah, you got one. Get by title. You have to do capitals. And then basically, in quotes, I would put the title of the list. So in this case, I'm going to do site pages, and then you do items / items. And then you basically, in parentheses, you give it the ID, which I'm just going to make up an ID. I'm going to do like 5 or something. I don't know what the real one is. You would get it from whatever got submitted, whatever that is. And then the headers here, these are what's kind of important and kind of consistent across the board. So the content type tells the system what type of content that you are submitting. And you basically need to do some very specific things here. And that would be like application, JSON. And then usually there's a couple different options here. I'm going to do OData verbose in this. You can also do like no metadata. You can do a bunch of different options. Doesn't really matter. But verbose is the one that I usually do. Because you're doing an update, you have to do a if match. This is basically saying, is this starting from a valid version of this item? So usually the way the updates work is you get an item, then you update the item, then you publish it. In that model, you have a matching, hashtag, if you will. So in the hash value, it basically says, hey, this is it's actually an E tag, but it basically says this is a way to confirm that the item that you started editing is the same item that you're updating. So if somebody makes a change between the time that you got the item and you're trying to update, it protects you from overwriting their changes. In your case, most of the time for these types of things, you're trying to be pretty brute force, if you will. And so it doesn't really matter, but you could have other options here that would allow you to get the right thing or make sure that you're more protected. So XHTTP method, basically saying I want to do a merge. This is saying I want to do a merge. I don't want to just overwrite. So if you didn't do a merge, if I excluded some properties, they would get cleared out, basically. So the merge is what allows you to only do a couple properties. So as an example, if I wanted to just update the title, I could do curly brace, title.
Got it in double quotes. Or quotes.
Oh, is it double quotes?
Yep.
Because it's proper JSON. Title of, right, my title. Now, if I run this, and I'll delete this again, and I will change this so that I'm creating another new page.
You should swap your ID out.
Yeah, let's see about that. Let's see if I can actually
God only
update.
knows what
I know.
what 5 is.
The problem is this is the body. Let me go look at the comment here. I'm going to see. I'm going to save this a second. Let me go look at the last run because this will give me what the response is. So I'm going to look here. Okay, so I didn't get any outputs that will help me. So given this, what I would have to do to get the ID of the item that I'm trying to update, I would then need to I meant to edit. I will need to get the item, which is going to be kind of annoying, but we will see what we can do.
Didn't get the ID out off the list?
The list, this is an HTTP request, not a other thing, and it didn't.
Just, but like if you wanted to hard code an ID.
Oh.
I'll just like
sure.
add the ID column.
Sure. I get where you're going.
I mean,
now.
you only got 9 minutes left, so.
Oh, is that all we got?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize we were at that
Time
far.
flies.
Okay, which one was it? Plain text area 1, somewhere right here. Let me show or hide.
So while you're doing that, Tanya asked another question: how to capture the submitter as the author of the page. So I think in MS Forms, if that's where it's coming from, number one, you need to not allow anonymous submissions, and that way you can actually figure out who the submitter is. And then from there, you would basically capture that user information, and you should be able to pass in the email, I think. I don't know if you need to put together the full JSON user object or not, but I think you can just pass in the email as the basically as the author field of that particular page. So that would be how you would connect those two things together.
Hopefully that works, and it doesn't, of course, because I probably did something wrong. Let's look. Parsing JSON light feeds or entries and requests without entry entity is set to, is not supported. Setting up as a parameter to the OData message reader, blah, blah, blah. I think this is because I did the no, but this is what you did. I usually don't. Yeah, what's the one that you?
No metadata.
This will probably work better. I think it's because I needed to tell it what type of object it was for the verbose option, but I don't remember. Let's try to test it again. We'll do the same one, but that will probably create a duplicate. So let's see. Maybe this. Hopefully this won't error. Of course it fails, but it's the other one, so I really need to edit this. It's because I created a duplicate over the top of the other one. Right. So let's do 3.
Hard coding. I love hard coding.
Yeah.
It's great.
Don't do this. Don't do that part of what I'm doing. Just trying to get an example going. Maybe. Bum. Success. So now the title should be my title for that particular one, which let's go look at this. And I'll refresh it. I think that was 1. Hopefully title was a thing. I don't even know. Maybe I should have done name or something. Nope, title's here, and it's my title.
Nice work.
So that is an example for you to update that. Yeah, correct, Tanya. Hard code it to figure it out, then make it dynamic, 100%. Especially when I'm doing it just a demo. But you should be able to watch this video to see. There's a bunch of other people that talk about this, to be clear. Like, this isn't new or really super unique to us. There's a lot of people. This is a very, very, very common way to deal with SharePoint in a raw developer, very powerful, very flexible. There's all sorts of stuff. Like I said, Microsoft has extensive documentation about these requests. Unfortunately, they're developer focused, so they're going to talk a lot about like what I think you saw probably here in this particular post. It's like, hey, like do this stuff, which is super developer focused. You just care about this, the method, the URL, and the body. So like what they're actually providing in it. That's the only thing you really care about when you're looking at if you're looking at their documentation, etc. Which here you were gonna find it. Yeah, that'd be great. I meant to do it like this. So Mike's going to post in chat, which hopefully we can also post in the YouTube chat. But this is like the full documentation about how to do it, which there's a bunch of developer style stuff, but like it should be pretty easy to work between. So for example, list items, there's retrieving, and then way down here somewhere.
That whole pile of stuff that you can do there. You can do through that action in Power Automate.
Yep. So here's creating a list item, and you can see like post, that's the action. This is the URL that you need to do. This is, don't worry about authorization. Don't worry about accept. This is the content type. And then, hey, here's the response, right? Like you don't need to worry about the content length or anything else, but here's this is the metadata. So again, in verbose, you have to do metadata and give it a type. Which you can just do SP list item. You don't have to do anything super complicated. Or you can do no metadata, like just let it rip. But
yes, that's what I do.
But yeah, hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully that it's very powerful. We use it all the time.
Okay, with the few minutes we have left, unless anyone else has a last-minute question, pop in here. But what is your other favorite time that you've twisted SharePoint's arm into making it do something that it shouldn't, like the news situation?
There is zero amount of favorites in that regard. I do not enjoy twisting SharePoint into doing my whim. It's a necessity, not a joy.
It's the one that
you can be
out
proud about it. Like you can be happy that you got it to work. But in my more than 20 years of working with SharePoint now, that's usually a sign of something that's not quite right, that you're not using the right technology.
I don't know. Like there's sometimes that where it's warranted, right? So like the news migration thing that I was talking about.
But that's not twisting it, right? Like that's just...
I mean, it's like, oh, how do I do it? And there's no good way. So for example, the scenario that I was working on was migrating classic news articles to modern news posts.
Yep.
Right. Which is, there's nothing out there for it. Right. And so having to like know the ins and outs of the REST API and how you can make that happen. It was fun. Like you get to know those calls. And then at the end of the day, when you turn that thing loose and you watch 1,000 news posts get created, and then you open each one and see that the images are there, the HTML is there, the author is correct. Like that's a good feeling.
Yeah. Tanya, one other thing that I was going to mention, actually, like you are starting from the perspective of you wanting a page. You could potentially use like PnP search web parts and lists instead and use the search infrastructure. And so like you're using the same kind of concept, but instead of creating pages, you're creating list items that have a category and some text, which is the person's response, and maybe an ID that allows you to like do threaded response. Like you could get crazy with it. Like you could.
We did that in classic SharePoint.
We did that in class. We did something similar. We didn't do threading, I don't think, but we did something similar in classic. Yeah. Yep. Which
it wasn't janky at all.
My only objection to your comment, Mitch, was that you said twist it. Like there's lots of cool stuff that I've done in SharePoint that I'm proud of. Like that's really cool. That is difficult, right? Like that's what I would say about the list. It's not, but it's meant.
The other one that I'm thinking of right now is like using the REST API to gather additional context and data and make the out-of-the-box SharePoint layout more enhanced for the user.
Oh, to show it on the page differently.
Give them additional stuff that you can't just add with a web part, or that you want to be part. Like in Classic, we refer to it as a master page, right? But now it would be part of the site design, like something that you can add that makes it nice for the user.
Yeah.
Right. And that they don't have to, the authors, the communications folks don't have to like build something onto every single page.
The other thing I would say to Mitch's question is like, I much prefer just doing stuff in SPFX. Like, I'd much rather just build an SPFX web part to do some of that stuff.
Yeah, that's today. That's modern.
I'm aware.
The classic, I don't know. Everyone used to hate SharePoint, but some people who like
classic
for some reason either love SharePoint or were in denial. Made it do some crazy things.
Yeah, remember when you implemented column level permissions?
Oh yeah, column level permissions.
That's how you received your Saint SharePoint moniker.
No, that is not how. This is not how. That was pre. That was pre that.
You were canonized.
That was a long time ago. That was a long time ago when you still could do all of that. You can't do that anymore.
No, now if you want to do that, use Dataverse.
Straight up.
Shameless plug.
All right, that brings us to time. Thanks for everyone that tuned in today. Before you go, we do want to share our next office hours is scheduled for June 7, and we have a link to that in the chat here, so you're welcome to register for that, and see you next time. If we were able to help you today, we'd love for you to visit testimonial.bulb.digital and leave us a friendly note there. Matt and Mike, thanks for your time today, and we'll see some of you again soon.